Hello everyone, my name is Sunny and welcome to my study session. I'm gonna be practicing drawing different materials, clothes, and mostly just folds. This is not exactly a tutorial, but I am gonna be sharing my process and what I learned along the way. So if you'll find it helpful, consider sharing this video. As always, feel free to follow along or just do your own thing while I yap, and let's get to it. Okay. So for this video, I made 3 different studies. First one is the simplest one. It has the least amount of folds and the material is the softest. First thing I did during this practice was using shapes rather than lines. To me, it becomes much easier to wrap my head around it when I do it that way. It's also less difficult to make it look like a photo rather than doing the line art and then some flat shading on top. I took a reference and tried to roughly replicate the outer shape. I'm not using lines, but I still made a draft of sorts. That way I could better understand the placement of shadows before I move on to the final, cleaner version. I feel like it's especially important with this piece, because all the folds in the final version need to look soft. I'm using a chunkier brush on purpose as well, so I don't get too caught up in making it perfect. Like I said, in this exercise, values are kind of the key, so at first I'm focusing more on the values themselves rather than any specific colors. After I'm done with that, I switch my brush to something smoother and more precise, and I repeat the steps with the desired colors. This time I'm sorting the values into layers and I place them starting with the darkest one. Yet again, it might look like I'm being rough with it, but I'm trying to pay attention to the edges. And that's another key part of this whole thing. With this sort of rendering, it's really important not to overblend. So I'm focusing on leaving some edges clean and sharp. It also helps me to not get lost as I move forward. I'm gonna be honest, this way of doing things is not even the type of a thing that I like to look at the most. Personally, I find more stylized and exaggerated pieces much more appealing, and yet, whenever I try to make my pieces look that way, they always feel empty or unfinished somehow. No matter what though, this sort of exercise is very helpful in expanding your brain's reference library and just understanding the values, textures, and folds better. And especially the values part seemed to be the missing part of many of my pieces that I've made in the past. But back to the process itself. Alright, this second study is actually the first one that I did, if I'm being completely honest. That's why the process was kind of different in this one. And that's also why it is done in a much more stylized way. The shadows are deeper, the highlights are brighter, and in general the differences in values are much more dramatic. Because of that, I tried to make it work mostly without blending. The material is also thicker and more structured. I do think that it would look a lot cleaner if I used a smoother brush. It would definitely imitate better that almost plasticky sheen of the boots. And one thing that I can tell you for sure, it was much easier doing it the sweater way rather than this way, because the process was kind of all over the place. And honestly, this was just much more complicated reference picture to follow. At the same time though, it really helped me to rely more on colors and choosing them myself rather than just blending stuff. I gotta say that already looking at it myself, I would make some changes to it, but since it was supposed to be a practice piece and not a final hyper-realistic rendered photo copy, I decided to just leave it as a lesson for myself. I think it's already served its purpose. This third one is honestly just hard mode to me. It has lots and lots of tiny folds and creases. The values don't differ from each other that much, so it's much harder to choose them well. On top of that, to make it look the closest to the reference picture as I can, I really needed to play around with saturation of shadows, which was not something that I expected to be a part of this exercise at all. The material is thinner, so it creases that much more easily, and so I also needed to add a lot of texture to it to make it look more natural. It required much more time and work to make this one look even remotely similar to the picture. As someone who mostly draws people and characters, enriching your brain with how different types of clothes fall on the body is always welcome. So I don't know, maybe if you thought you might not need it because it's not the style that you're going for, or you just feel like something might be missing in your art, give this a try. It is really an eye-opening experience in so many ways that I didn't expect. And I definitely think that it's the type of exercise that will help me to not only observe things better, but also draw things more accurate when I'm trying to just sketch from my head. I might have jumped the gun with it a little bit, not gonna lie, but in the end I decided to push through, and I'm curious to know, what do you think? Was this a successful attempt? Let me know. Anyways, I think that will be all from me today. I could probably ramble some more, but I wanted to make sure that this video is more easily understandable and concise in what I'm saying, that everything has a purpose. So again, I hope you find it helpful or at least entertaining. Take care of yourself, drink water, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!